everyone and welcome back. It's now autumn. We now have the storage buildings NPCs need and the infrastructure to do mining. Before we go on, it's worth noting that the environment changes based on the season. Foliage on trees will change color, and there's autumn mushrooms available to gather. In terms of quests, you may have reached chapter 4 for the main quest. It is also the available steps in Unigoth's and Albion's questlines. Personally, I consider this to be a good time to stop doing the main quests, because a hunting lodge is best built once you have extra villagers to work as hunters, and none of the other main quests give rewards that merit focusing on questing. We started romancing Kunigunda last season, and we've made quite a bit of progress so far. It should only take a bit more convincing for her to accept our marriage proposal. But before we marry, and before we recruit other villagers, it's worth waiting until you have unlocked the simple house tech. The reason is that the earliest house types allow 3 occupants, 1 couple and 1 child, but the simple house allows 4, meaning that each couple in the village can have 2 children. Rasimir, or any other character the player controls, can only have 1 child at any one time. It seems that you can remarry and have another child once your current one grows up and moves out, but for all intents and purposes, the player will only need 3 beds, so the first house type is fine. However, if you want other village families to have as many children as possible, then you should wait until you unlock simple houses before recruiting villagers other than your wife. One way to accrue building tech points is to mine. We have the infrastructure to process copper ore into bars and forge copper tools. That gives us both tech points and goods to sell for money. If you didn't manage to get the pouch and backpacks last summer, then this is the best way to get the money for that. Once you've unlocked a simple house or are close to it, you also want to build the woodshed. The reason to focus on the woodshed at this point is that it allows you to turn logs into planks. These are required in order to build the highest upgrades to housing. Another reason for the woodshed is that all NPCs need jobs to do, unless they're raising children, and all NPCs will require both fuel for fire and food. Food you can supply by the methods we discussed previously. Fuel, on the other hand, requires either gathering sticks or firewood. Firewood is the most efficient fuel, but it requires logging. Logging is best done by NPCs because they don't deplete trees, whereas the player logging will physically chop down trees, and you'll eventually have to go further and further afield to get trees to harvest. You can then turn logs into firewood every so often and put them into the resource storage chest. NPCs will automatically get firewood from there without you needing to intervene. By setting your wife to log trees, you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. She gets a job and works to supply her own fuel needs. You just have to worry about having enough food, and that's easy enough. There's a 3rd level of housing available near the bottom of the housing tech tree, but the only benefit is to your ego, because they don't offer any more beds than simple houses. For that reason, I consider simple houses the highest level for my villagers, and focus on making them the best they can be. That means upgrading walls to stone, and roofs to wood tiles, in order to make them as durable and fuel efficient as possible. We'll destroy and reconstruct our current house, in preparation for our future wife. But before you do that, make sure to gather enough logs and stone to expedite the construction. You can get plenty of free stone from mining copper deposits, and you'll need to chop down a few trees. Make sure to upgrade the walls and roof before you start building. Once the house is ready, and your prospective wife is sufficiently attracted to you, then propose and marry. Then the next morning, send her off to log some trees at the woodshed. You'll have to provide the tools she needs. So every so often, just make and store a stack of stone or copper axes in the woodshed chest or the resource storage chest. She'll automatically fetch and use them. You should also have a child as soon as possible to ensure the den is in line in case you happen to die in a hunting accident. Normally I'd wait until next spring to build a barn and plant grain crops. But at the end of summer, I dropped the unripe berries on the floor of the resource storage and they're fully rotted. So we can make fertilizer at our new barn. Since it's autumn, we can plant rye, so we should get a starter crop going. As we saw when we harvested cabbages, each harvest gives you more seeds than you originally planted. We're going to make use of that fact by only buying enough seeds to plant our small 2x8 field. The harvest will give us around 120 or 130 seeds. Then we can use those seeds to plant a much larger plot next year. Once the crop has matured, you'll have to have a sickle or a scythe to harvest the plants. Then take them to the barn and use the threshing floor to separate the seeds from the stalks. Only then is the harvest useful to you. Most grain crops will give seeds and straw. Once you get animals, you'll be using rye, oats and straw to craft animal feed. So don't think about having animals until you've had a few big harvests of rye and oat. These can also be turned into flour at the quern, and you can use that for baking later on. Flax crops will be needed if you want to make clothing or other items from linen at the sewing hut. The other major component for crafting at the sewing hut is wool, and that comes from sheep, which require animal feed to raise. So you can see how grain crops are a critical step towards baking, making clothes, and animal husbandry. In the meantime, you can cook rye grains into gruel. This is one of the most cost-effective foods you can make in the game. I've not needed to because I harvest enough vegetables and hunt enough meat. But gruel is something to keep in mind if you find yourself running short on food. Once you unlock simple houses, your wife is producing logs, and your food supply is reliable, then you can think about recruiting other NPCs. Recruiting is now a matter of just speaking to the recruitable NPCs. They'll always agree without the need for the conversation minigame. But before you go around recruiting everybody, you should make sure you have a plan. Villagers need to be housed, employed, and have their nourishment and fuel needs met. You should know by now how to make a fully upgraded simple house, and have a grasp of how to take care of food and fuel needs. Employment is another matter and needs some planning. Personally, I recommend using NPCs for primary industries. This is because generally these are repetitive activities that might become tedious and grindy. But there's also benefits that only NPCs can provide. I already mentioned logging as a task that NPCs are better at than the player, because they don't physically chop down trees. Another is working at the excavation shed, because only NPCs can get limestone, and that's useful for getting the final upgrade to your houses. Later on, once you've unlocked mines, then you should assign NPCs to that task. Animals breeding only happens when you've assigned NPCs to these jobs. So if you want to multiply your herds, then that's another job your villagers must fill. On the other hand, the player is better at hunting because every animal you kill gives you both meat and leather or fur. Whereas for NPCs, these are separate tasks, so they're less efficient than you are. Crafting is another area where you'll be much faster than NPCs, especially if you take advantage of evenings and seasonal changes to maximize your crafting time. Women in your village that have children younger than 2 years old will stop doing their job, so you need to take into account that jobs will become vacant at random points. That's why I assign men to the primary resource jobs, to make sure there's a steady supply of raw materials, and women to the crafting, because if they become pregnant and leave their jobs, the supply chain won't break completely. I also assign women as additional workers on primary resources. For example, 1 man and 1 woman on logging allows you to still have a supply of logs even if the woman becomes pregnant. Once women have had 2 children, then there's no difference in the jobs you can assign to them. Right now I'll be looking to recruit another couple. The man should work as a logger, to ensure there's a supply of logs even when my wife is occupied as a mother. And the villager's wife can work on the smithy, crafting tools from the ore I mine, until she also becomes occupied with motherhood. Rasimir has taken significant steps forward this season. We ensured that the village has the means to grow the crops needed to sustain an animal husbandry infrastructure. As technology unlocks and new jobs open up, villagers will be recruited to fill them. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Feel free to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when new videos come out. See you soon.